I want to welcome you to the second CLP in our February Tocqueville event focused on American foreign policy. My name is Brent Nelson, and I am the director of the Tocqueville Center for the Study of Democracy and Society and a member of the Department of Politics and International Affairs. I hope you received a brochure. I see some out there. That brochure has all great information in it. If you didn't get one, you can certainly get one at the door. It also has a bunch of QR codes in it, so you can get even more great information. So pick up a brochure if you don't have one already. If you're new to the Tocqueville Center, we are a group of faculty and students committed to seeking truth and cultivating thoughtful, informed, and ethical citizens through the exploration of the great questions that shape political, economic, religious, and social life in America and the wider world. We are named after Alexis de Tocqueville, the French aristocrat who traveled to the United States in the early 1830s and published his seminal work, Democracy in America, in 1835 and 1840. He was eager to understand how this new country, built on the notion that all were created equal, could govern itself without the trappings of aristocratic authority. Like Tocqueville, we too wish to comprehend what it means for a free and equal people to govern themselves. There are several important ways you can get involved with the center. If you are a student, consider applying to be named a Tocqueville Fellow. We have a whole bunch in the audience. They're wearing name tags, says Tocqueville Fellow on it. You can ask them what it's all about. This is a high commitment organization that requires attendance at Tocqueville events, weekly discussions, and 2 all expenses paid off campus weekend retreats. That is one of the big benefits. Applications for next year's fellows are now open, and you can use that QR code to get to that application. If you're not willing or able to make a big commitment to Tocqueville, but still want to be involved in some discussions about the topics explored by our guest speakers, then the Beaumont Fellows are for you. There's no application. There they are. There's no application. All you have to do is get your name on our list, and you will begin to get information on Beaumont activities. And there's a QR code for you as well. And there are also Beaumont Fellows who are in the audience with little name tags as well, so talk to them. Finally, if you're a member of OLLI and you know who you are and want to be part of the Tocqueville Special Interest Group, please see Al. Raise his hand. Raise your hand. Al, we don't have a QR code for Al. So you just actually have to do the human thing and go and talk to him face to face. So that's a good thing. So now to tonight's event. Last evening, Professor Mark Amstutz explored some of the ways the Christian church in its many forms can contribute to public policy and the international common good. Tonight, we will look at the relationship between the American military and the culture wars in the age of President Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Our guide through this relationship is Peter Feaver, professor of political science and public policy at Duke University. He is director of the Duke program in American Grand Strategy and co-principal investigator of the America in the World Consortium. He was educated at Lehigh University and received his PhD at Harvard. Professor Feaver is an accomplished scholar. Among his many books are Guarding the Guardians, Civilian Control of Nuclear Weapons in the United States, Armed Servants, Agency Oversight and Civil Military Relations, Choosing Your Battles, American Civil Military Relations and the Use of Force, Paying the Human Costs of War, and most recently, Thanks for Your Service, The Causes and Consequences of Public Confidence in the U.S. Military. Professor Feaver, however, is also an experienced policymaker, From June 2005 to July 2007, Professor Feaver served as Special Advisor for Strategic Planning and Institutional Reform on the National Security Council staff at the White House, where his responsibilities included the National Security Strategy, regional strategy reviews, and other political military issues. In 1993-94, Professor Feaver served as Director for Defense Policy and Arms Control on the National Security Council at the White House. And finally, many of you may be familiar with Professor Feaver from the pages of Foreign Affairs, where he publishes frequently. Tonight, we will first hear from Professor Feaver and then invite our guest speakers. If you were here last night, you saw who they were, to the stage for a panel discussion, and I'll introduce them at that time. We will conclude our evening with audience Q&A. So now, please welcome Professor Peter Feaver.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Brent, and it's good to be here. And because I'm at a school that has rich Baptist roots, I think I should tell you that I'm approaching tonight's talk like a Baptist preacher, which is to say that I'm here to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. So if you walked in here believing that there's nothing to worry about regarding civil-military relations, I'm hoping that I'll disturb you a little bit as I address some of the things that are going on. But if you walked in here under a cloud of despair, believing that the end is near, then I hope I can reassure you that we've made it thus far, 250 years, and I believe we have what it takes to make it further still. So wherever you come, however you walked in the door, I hope you are changed a little bit as you walk out. Civil-military relations, as you could tell from the description of stuff I've been working on, is something that I'm obsessed with, and I'm part of a tiny group of nerds that worry about civil-military relations. We're the red-headed stepchildren of the political science field. We are small, tiny, beleaguered, feel like no one pays attention to us. And we draw some comfort from an analogy that Joe Nye has used about another issue, but works well for healthy civil-military relations, that healthy civil-military relations is like oxygen in the air. You never give it a moment's thought when you have it. But when you don't have it, it's the only thing you can think about. And we've made it with reasonably healthy civil-military relations in the United States until now, so most people don't think about it. But if we were to lose it, we would be obsessed with that problem, and I think in the process we would lose our republic as well. That's certainly what the founders of our republic thought. If you go deep on the Federalist Papers, you'll see they spent a lot of time thinking about civil-military relations and designed a system that they thought would be sturdy to the challenges that might arise. So let me describe what I mean by civil-military relations. It's actually referring to two baskets of issues. There's a lot of things that fall under the heading of civil-military relations, and they tend to cluster into one of two baskets. One basket is civil-military interactions at the senior leader level. So right now, if you're reading the newspaper, you know that the president is threatening Iran with military action as a way of driving Iran to make more concessions on the negotiating table with regard to Iran's nuclear ambitions. This is a classic problem of American foreign policy. But there's also a heavy civil-military dimension to it, namely the president and his senior national security team interacting with the senior military leaders, which would be General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the principal military advisor to the Secretary of War and to the president, as well as the CENTCOM commanders, who are the ones who would execute any military strike if that's what the president ordered. But they are also the ones right now assembling the Armada and the Air Armada the naval and air armada that has been assembled and placing them where they are and having them be ready for whatever could be done. That's civil military relations. As they advise the president on what options are available, what are the risks associated with different options, and then the president and the president's team making those decisions, that's civil military relations in action. That's one basket. I'll talk about that more in a moment, but I want to also introduce the second basket, which is societal military interactions. It's the military as an institution interacting with the civilian society from which the military institution comes. And that is also civil military relations. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that, as was indicated in Brent's introduction. But let me first begin with the first basket of stuff. Civil military interactions as they're making strategy and implementing military operations. In this area, there's a remarkable paradox in American civil military relations. We have an enviable record of civilian control of the military. 250 years, no coup, no serious coup attempt, and barely a rumor of a coup. And many of our established NATO allies, advanced industrial democracies, can't compete with that. There was a coup in France in my lifetime, or coup attempt anyway, in my lifetime, the lifetime of the Ali representatives in the room, and never in the United States. So a great record of civilian control of the military. But the paradox is an unbroken record of worrying about civilian control of the military. Every Secretary of Defense that came into office, beginning with the first one, Forstall, all the way to the current one, Secretary Hegseth, arrived in office believing that they had to reassert civilian control over the military, that the military had gotten a little big for its britches or had gotten off the reservation in some way and had to be reined back, and civilian control had to be reasserted. So you have this paradox. Worry about civilian control, but a record of unbroken civilian control. And I'm just curious, as you hear that, maybe you're hearing that for the first time, how would you explain that paradox? And please raise your hand if you have a theory as to why would we have an unbroken record of civilian control and an unbroken record of worrying about civilian control. What do you think? What do you think? Yes, the look of terror in your eyes, I love it. That's the great payoff of being a professor, is the cold call as you get to call us to. Just when I say that, what comes to your mind?
I think the fact that we have a right to worry about it and address these issues publicly shows why we, on the other hand, should be worried about it.
That's excellent. That's actually a really good answer. Maybe because we worry about it, that's why we don't have the problem. And if we ever stopped worrying about it, maybe we would get the problem. I think that's part of it. I don't think that's all of it, but that is a good part of the explanation. Other thoughts? What else might be going on? Yeah.
I mean, this is sort of similar, but just like because we have a populace that really values that divide demonstrably over time, it's just like a really good political move to just like always say that you're like reasserting control, even if like there wasn't really a need to reassert control.
Yeah, possibly. Possibly, as we'll see in the second basket, it could cut against you. But I see your point. Yeah, that's possible. What else might be going on? Surprised no one's mentioned partisanship, right? Maybe you reassert civilian control when the party changes hands, and so when the White House goes from D to R or R to D, then it's time to clean house. That, I think, is part of the story, but it's not all of the story. So even in when there's a successive Secretary of Defense within an administration, there's a reassertion. So Secretary Gates, who took over from Secretary Rumsfeld in Bush administration, or Secretary Ash Carter, who took over from Secretary Hagel in the Obama administration, they both came in saying we have to reassert control. So it's even when it's within a single administration, you still see it. It's also the case, another explanation that often comes up is, well, it's just so large. The military is enormous. And this is absolutely the case. If we could somehow bring the framers back, or Tocqueville back, and say, take a look at today, what do you notice about today that might have constitutional implications? They would say, how in the world do you have such a large military and you haven't lost the freedoms of the republic? They didn't think you could have a military as large as ours, as capable as the one we have, as salient as the one we have, that wouldn't be a threat to liberty. So I think that's part of it. What we have today sits uneasily with the ideology that gave birth to the country. So these are all good answers, and if I had more time, we could do this seminar at length and pull out many more. But I actually wanted to jump to one that I think is the most underappreciated aspect of why we have this friction at this level of civil-military relations, and has to do with the way the military and the civilian enters into the relationship. They do so like newlyweds. They do so like folks who are getting married and arriving into the marriage with an expectation of how they think things are going to go. Those of you who are married, maybe cast your mind back to what you thought your marriage relationship was going to be like, and what you thought your roles would be, and what your marriage partner's roles would be. And then you have the joy of discovering that your partner had very different expectations about how it was going to go. At least this is what I'm told. Not in my marriage, of course, but in other people's marriages, they arrive and discover that the other is doing things differently than what was expected. And this is introducing friction. And this is exactly what happens in American civil-military relations, because the American military comes into the relationship believing that it's going to go the way Sam Huntington outlined it would go in the book Soldier in the State. This is a remarkable book, like one of the seminal works in American civil-military theory. And Huntington describes a relationship where there's a clear zone that is civilian, and there's a clear zone that is the military. And the military voluntarily subordinate themselves to civilian authority when they're making the decisions that are civilian to make. And then in exchange, the civilian delegates to the military autonomy in the domains that are the military to make. And this creates the optimum conditions for civilian control and military effectiveness, according to Sam Huntington. So in the case of the question of whether to bomb Iran, it's the president's decision whether to bomb Iran. This would be Sam Huntington's theoretical outline. And then how to do so, how to execute those strikes, which weapon systems to use, and what rules of engagement to deploy. Well, that's a military technical issue that should be delegated down to the military. And generations of American military officers have taught themselves that's how it's going to go, until they meet with the civilian in the relationship and they discover that the civilian political leaders that the voters keep electing don't think that that's how civil-military relations should go. They say if there's a line that divides between what's yours to decide and what's ours to decide, that line is drawn by us, the civilian. And we can draw that line way deep into issues that the military would say that's a military one to describe. The Obama administration, famous or maybe infamous for micromanaging on some very, very delicate issues, particularly having to do with the global war on terror as as executed in the Middle East, drone strikes, level of White House scrutiny on what the military believed were properly tactical decisions. But the president said, no, this is a strategic decision that I want to reserve for myself. Secretary Rumsfeld, of course, was infamous for doing this in the planning for the Iraq War. And when you have this level of miscommunication or misexpectation of how it's going to go, it's an opportunity for friction. And you can have military officers, I've heard them say this, I believe in civilian control, but you're the wrong civilian. And I'm not only going to take that kind of instruction or that kind of guidance or that kind of meddlesome questions if the president himself calls me up. And you can have civilians interacting with the military where they say, something's going awry in, let's say, South Sudan, send over options of what the military can do. And a military officer hearing that request would say, what is the end state that you want? Options to do what? To accomplish what goal? And the civilian on the other end of the line would say, I don't know, send me some options and I'll decide what kind of end state I want. And the military say, well, it doesn't work that way. You have to tell us the end state. That's the input to the option generation machine. And until you tell us that we can't provide an option, at this point, the civilian is going to say, are you trying to slow roll us? Are you trying to prevent the president from seeing these options? And the military will say, no, we literally cannot do our job. And you see the friction as the civilian is trying to preserve maximum flexibility. That's the prime directive. If you work at the White House, the prime directive is preserve the president's flexibility. Do not commit the president to something that the president has not committed themselves to, and give him flexibility to back out if he changes his mind. That's true across every administration. But the military, of course, works on a different planning assumption, which says make a decision so that we can then do the rest of the careful orchestration that is necessary, but commit to the decision. And the earlier you commit, the better it's going to go. Do you see the opportunity for friction? This recurs across every administration. When you tell me a civil military, quote unquote, crisis in execution, chances are if you pull the thread on that or look more closely, what you'll find is some version of this that I just described. So that's civil-military relations at the strategy and execution level, and is a challenge for every administration. The second basket of issues, though, is this societal-military interaction. And this, too, is framed by a paradox. This paradox is that we hold the military in very high esteem, we, the American public, but we, the American public, have a very low propensity to join the military. It's high regard at high remove. Thanks for your service. I'm glad you're doing it, so I don't have to do it. The military described this as the civil-military gap, or the problem of the 99% and the 1%. The 1% went off to war after 9/11, and 99% went off to the mall. I think that's an unfair characterization of the reality, particularly with folks like our foreign service officers who served downrange in theater and not in uniform. But the military have that mindset that they were the 1% and the civilians were the 99%. And so you have that paradox. Why such a high level of confidence, high respect for the military, and a low propensity to join the military? I don't want to dig into the causes of it so much. Today I want to talk about the consequences, or in the time remaining I want to talk about the consequences. And there's several that emerge from this. One of the aspects of this phenomenon, or this paradox, is that it can produce the phenomenon of pedestalization. And this is where the American public will put the military on a pedestal. And of course, once you're up there on the pedestal, what does that mean as you're looking at the American public? You're looking down. at the American public. And if you're on a pedestal like that, it may be easy to be knocked off the pedestal and crash and burn. And so this pedestalization of the military gives them very high, almost ritualistic regard. Think about how many times you feel obliged to say thanks for your service. Or what has occurred to you when you have lots of bags and you want to get on the plane soon, and then they say, now we were first going to allow the military to get on the plane and take all of the overhead luggage space. Is there not an opportunity for alienation? And indeed, we do see that in American society of the civilians that do not understand the military, do not have skin in the game for the military, do not send their children into the military. And so for them, the military is a spectator sport. It's something that they see maybe at a sporting event or something. That's when they connect to the military. But of course, for those in the military, it's a very different. But what if you're on the other side of that alienation? What if you have been told for generations now, for 20 years, we've been telling the military, you represent the best of American society? Is it not possible that an institution that's been told that repeatedly will begin to think that they are, in fact, better than civilian society? Being on a pedestal can make you look down on others. And this is a concern as well. It's why I think it's very unhelpful to have the civilian and the military separated as they are in American society. And I would not support efforts to take the military out of, say, civilian institutions like higher education. It's useful to have the military in all of the colleges, as many colleges as possible, precisely to create opportunities for reconnection across these. So pedestalization is one of the phenomenon. The other phenomenon is politicization of the military. If you are a political leader, one of the things you know is that the public has high regard for the military and low regard for you, or at least for your institution. So it's the military, depending on the poll, maybe 58, 60% of the American public will say they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the military. What's the number for Congress? It might be 11, 12%. Very, very low. Sadly, higher education, not very high either. So if you're a politician, that creates an incentive for you to get as much of the glow of that high regard institution wrapped around you as possible. And so, as you present your political agenda, you might like to have wallpaper behind you that is military. And every president has done this, has sought to make a partisan speech while having the military behind them. And it looks like, okay, maybe the military is supporting this popular institution that still brings America together. One of the few things that brings America together in our polarized political space. And they're approving of this political agenda, so maybe that's a good thing for us. So you can see the incentive it creates for political leaders. But that's very pernicious for the military. Because if the military gets identified with partisan agendas, that begins to make the military look like a partisan institution. And when I started in this business quite a long time ago, I would talk about how in the United States we have two institutions that are held in high regard: the military, and there was one other that was up there with the military. Anyone care to guess what was really highly regarded in the 90s? The Supreme Court. I don't have to say that anymore. It's just the military alone. The Supreme Court over the last 30 years has declined. And now, and what is the reason? I think one of the reasons is that when you look at the Supreme Court, it looks like a partisan institution, just like Congress is a partisan institution. Of course, constitutionally, Congress is supposed to be designed to be the closest to the public, and so we'll have a partisan identity. But the Supreme Court's not supposed to. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, above partisan politics. That's not how the U.S. public sees the Supreme Court today. If they see the United States military that way, I think it'll drive down. It could have, as a second or third order effect, a negative impact on public confidence in the military. But it's actually worse than that, because we as Americans are more partisan than we know, or than we're willing to admit. Because when pollsters like me ask the public to describe what they think of as partisan activity, they say the following: the military is being partisan when the military agrees with the other party. But when the military is agreeing with my party, that's not partisan, that's just sensible. And you see how pernicious that is? It means that the military, because combine it with the first point, that the military is subordinate to civilian authority. When the civilian political leadership tell the military to do something, and it's a lawful order, the military has to do it. But when the military does that, partisan Americans look at that and say, that's what I like, therefore the military is being nonpartisan, or that's what I don't like, therefore the military is being partisan. Do you see the problem? And it's most pernicious, and this brings me finally to the culture war. This phenomenon, which spans many, many different issue areas, is particularly pernicious in the culture war, which is one of our most polarized partisan debates. And if you have a culture war agenda and you're in the political space, you would like to see your agenda carried out through the military. And the military is a wonderful institution to do this because they obey orders and carry them out. And so you can change the policies and the behaviors of the U.S. military on these culture questions by issuing orders. But when you do so in the culture wars, you are making the military combatants in our culture wars. You're targeting the military and shooting at the military when you're really making a partisan argument, or you're hiding behind the military institution as you advance a controversial partisan agenda. And so for the last several years, I've had this quixotic goal of saying, let's grant the military non-combatant immunity in the culture wars. In the same way that we say in military operations, civilians on the battlefield should not be targeted, the military as an institution should not be targeted in partisan culture wars. As a civilian polity, we should be arguing about these and deciding what we want to do on this or that question. And those are totally legitimate questions for political leaders to decide, but do so in the political space, not fighting through the military institution. Because we need that military institution to be trusted by whomever becomes president of the United States and viewed as the nonpartisan instrument of the state that the military profession prides itself in being. If we make the military a partisan actor, we will be making it incapable of doing its primary job, which is defending the national security. And so please join me in this quest. Stop targeting the military in your culture wars, and reach out to the military across that civil-military divide to learn about what they're going through, and maybe we can keep this republic going for another 250 years. So why don't I stop there, and we'll. Okay.
I'm always surprised when the speakers stick to their time limit.
Yes.
I give them, usually a couple of minutes grace, but you are right on the dot. So
Thank you.
that's great. Thank you, Peter.
You told me you wouldn't pay me if I didn't hit my numbers, so I had to.
Did I promise to pay you? I don't know.
Good point.
What? I would like to invite our panelists to the stage, and let me introduce them to you. The first one is Mark Amstutz. He is Professor of Political Science Emeritus at Wheaton College. Professor Amstutz grew up in Latin America, but came to the United States for his education, where he earned a BA at Houghton College and his MA and PhD at American University. For more than a decade, he served as a reserve naval attaché, which makes him perfect for this panel here, retiring as a commander from the U.S. Naval Reserve in 1993. He has written many books, including Christian Ethics and U.S. Foreign Policy, The Healing of Nations, The Promise and Limits of Political Forgiveness, Evangelicals in American Foreign Policy, and Just Immigration, U.S. Policy in Christian Perspective. His textbook, International Ethics, is the seminal text in the field, now in its 6th edition. His most recent book is Building World Order: How the Christian Faith Fosters Global Peace, Prosperity, and Justice. And may I ask Larry Richter? Larry Richter is retired as a senior Foreign Service officer with the Department of State in September 2020 after 33 years and assignments in 10 countries on 4 continents, ranging from Armenia to Zimbabwe. In his last 4 overseas assignments, he served as Minister Counselor for Management in Afghanistan, London, Tokyo, and again in Afghanistan. Among his more interesting assignments, he served in Rwanda during the Civil War from 1991 to 93, and then returned for 2 months to reopen the embassy immediately after the genocide. He also served as acting Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Mission to the UN in Geneva for 15 months at the beginning of the Obama administration, as the U.S. rejoined the UN Human Rights Council and negotiated the New START Treaty with Russia, which has just stopped. I'm sure Sam will have a podcast on the START Treaty soon, right? Oh, okay. So he's already written an article. You need to meet Sam. He is the recipient of several meritorious and superior honor awards. He was also named Management Officer of the Year and was awarded Presidential Pay for Meritorious Service. So please welcome our panelists. Well, as I usually do at these, I like to ask the panelists to react to what Peter has spoken about here. And I think I'll start with Mark, because you're the one with the military experience here and may have some ideas about some of the things that he's been talking about. And you can please use your microphone, which needs to be turned on. Yeah.
Is it on?
Is
Can
it?
you hear me?
Nope. Try it again.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Well, first of all, Peter, thank you for this compelling overview of civil-military relations, and I would just think that what you've said about the importance of protecting the institution of the military from partisanship is right on the money. And one of the question, I guess, that I have is, it's a two-way street. It takes credible military people to know their role as military people and not as politicians. And it also, on the other side, it takes capable civilian political people to know their role in not overstepping their bounds and to respect the role of the military. So I guess my question that I come to is, given our current situation, which I think is quite extraordinary in my estimation, is that if you have a president like uh, Bush 41 or even Ronald Reagan, who did not serve in the military, they seemed to be amenable to a relatively um, cordial, effective civil military relationship. The current administration strikes me as pushing the bounds of, in a more aggressive way, to demanding uh, a role in the military. So I guess my question for Professor Feaver is how should the military respond to excessively aggressive appointed civilian leaders who are seeking to change? And as you pointed out, even in the Obama administration, you have the issue of, of rather significant intrusion into affairs that are primarily in the military. So it's a I say thank you for your eloquent service and your emphasis on expressing gratitude for the military's role in offering security and protection, but it's a two-way street, and so I would be interested in the reflections on that.
Should I answer that? Or
Yeah,
should I?
why don't you go ahead? That's directly applicable.
So several things I think are going on. One of them is that most civilians do not, as they're taking their civilian political leadership role, haven't thought deeply about civil military relations. It was possible to go from nothing to director on the director on the National Security Council staff without having done any prep work on civil military relations, which is striking when you think about this. And so one of the concerns we have is in my little tribe is, can we do a better job of educating civilians on military affairs and on civil military relations before they become civilians in the civil military strategy making enterprise? And I do think that's important, but I don't think that's sufficient, because if you think about the ones that have been leaders during particularly stormy times, they knew a lot about the military before. I'm thinking now of President Eisenhower, one of our most militarily knowledgeable presidents in modern times, but his civil military relations were very stormy. And he thought it got so bad that he used his farewell address to warn about it and warn about the military industrial complex. So you can really know the military. You can come from the Army and still believe that the Army has run amok, which is where Eisenhower was. And of course, in the current situation, Secretary Hegseth literally wrote a book about civil military relations, laying out what he thought was the problem. So he had thought quite a lot about civil military relations before he came into office. So it's not merely a case of unfamiliarity. However, I do think that the American system and the civilians in the American system are prone to overcorrect. And so one of the phenomena we see from president to president, and this is not just the current administration, but previous presidents, I think the Bush 43 came into office with an ABC mentality. Anything but Clinton. Clinton had produced such disasters on his watch that we were going to do the opposite of that. And of course, President Obama came in to office with an ABB mentality. If Bush wanted to go this way, then the correct answer was to go the other. And in some of the mistakes that were made by either of those two administrations, I think can partly be attributed to this overcorrection. And that brings us to the present concerns about a quote unquote woke military. I don't think the military is or was woke. I work in a woke institution, higher education. That's what a woke institution looks like. And the military was not like that. But was there an overemphasis on DEI in the Biden administration? I think fair-minded people could say, yeah, maybe they went a little bit too far. I know many, many military officers, senior military officers said, well, I think we're maybe dialing this up to 11 when we don't need to be at 11. We can dial it back. And they were ready for a course correction when the new administration came and were welcoming a slightly different emphasis. I heard quite a few senior military leaders talk that way. Some of them got fired for the perception that they weren't going to be moving fast enough. And so I think what has happened is maybe an overcorrection from what was a perceived problem before. Okay, long-winded answer, but where does it end? It ends with the burden on the military, because the military is a profession like other professions. And at the end of the day, we don't ask patients to master medical ethics. We don't ask customers to master legal ethics. We expect the holders of the profession. So I do spend a lot of my time talking to the military and saying, even if the civilians you're serving don't get it, you still have to do what's right. And you have to help the civilians learn to be the best civilian leaders they can be. And so I do think there's a disproportionate burden that falls on the military, even though I agree with you that much of the misbehavior often shows up on the civilian side, and that I can go back many, many decades with examples of that. I'll stop there.
Okay. Larry.
Yeah, there's, well, nobody ever really thinks about the State Department in these terms. There are some parallels between the State Department and the military in that regard. For one thing, the Foreign Service is patterned after the military in many ways. You know, we hold rank in person rather than in position. We have the same promotion policies, up and out policies, and that sort of thing. And like the military, we're deployed, and we follow the instructions of the administration. And I think they have many of the same concerns about State Department that they do about the military. We don't have weapons, so we're less dangerous in that respect. On the other hand, you know, we are responsible for implementing the policy of the administration, and there is very often a distrust when a new administration comes in because they see, oh, you've been administering the policy of the previous administration. How can we trust you to administer ours? You may have been a little too enthusiastic, in our view, during the last administration. And I've certainly seen that in when we have a new political ambassador, for example, come into an embassy, and their distrust of the staff around them at first takes time to win that trust and to demonstrate to them that, in fact, you are interested in fulfilling the concerns that they have and meeting the requirements that they have. And in some cases, that distrust has been so difficult to overcome that some senior staff have had to leave in order to give the ambassador the confidence that he's bringing in people that will be responsive to his requirements, fairly or unfairly. So,
First of all, I want to say thank you, Peter, for a Spinal Tap reference
Yes.
from 11
Yes.
down. But there are only a few people in the room that would understand that reference. But I caught it.
Good.
That was really good. That was really good. Let me ask. You brought up the notion of wokeness in the military, and I think there was Well, first of all, let me start back. The military has, in many ways, been on the forefront of American change for a long time. So, famously, integration of the armed forces was ahead of certainly Furman University, and but also the bringing of women in, and so civil rights, women's rights, those kinds of things, in many ways, were kind of modeled for Americans through the military. And once the military was able to do something, well, we thought, hey, if they can do it, maybe the rest of the society can do it. So, in some sense, if you want to think about progressive social policies, the military has been a place where politicians, in particular, have wanted to, push them and push American society to go along with them. And I could have seen that, and I'm going to ask you if I'm wrong here. In the Biden administration, there were some of these videos that seemed to be pushing transgender or gender fluidity as acceptable within the military. And for some people, including some military people that I knew, they thought that was, whoa, a bridge too far. But I could see from the Biden administration, they would say, no, this is just, we're just, using the military like we have in a lot of other civil rights issues. Is that a good use of the military in the culture war, or is that a bad use of the military in the culture war?
Well, you're absolutely right that has been part of the history of the military, and it has interacted with military effectiveness. So it's not just using the military as a engine for social change, but it's also, can we sustain our military effectiveness if we don't do this? And so after World War II, they realized that we could not justify excluding African Americans from integrated service. Why? Because they had proven on the battlefield that all of the arguments against it were wrong and were based on ignorance rather than on any valid scientific reason. And moreover, those brave soldiers had earned the right of citizenship in the most dear way. And out of that generation came some of the great civil rights leaders who, having learned the organization and the self-confidence that comes from serving in the military, they then were able to carry that through to civil rights in the rest of civilian society. But when Truman integrated the military, he did so over the objections of the Army that said, whoa, we're not ready for this. This is going to be a disaster, and it's going to undermine our military effectiveness. And the Truman said, we're going to do it. In the long run, this is what we need to do to make us effective. Fast forward to the integration of women in the military. If you track the scores, the ASVAB scores of, which is like the SAT or the GRE, an aptitude score, the U.S. military remains relatively high on the ASVAB score, thanks to women joining the military. It's the women that are propping up those ASVAB scores over the last several decades of the all-volunteer force. And when you're fighting the kind of high-tech war we're fighting today, you want the most capable warriors, and their gender is not relevant to whether they can be space guardians effectively or what have you. They're being measured on things other than their the physical qualities that are gendered. And so, but if you go back to when women were being integrated into the force more openly, there was this same argument. Oh my goodness, if we do this, we're going to destroy morale, destroy unit cohesion, and destroy our effectiveness as the military. So that argument has always been leveled. And what I say is that the military has been used as a vanguard, but if it's too far out in front, if the gap between what you're asking the military to do and what civilian society can accept is too great, then it's not going to work. But if civilian society catches up to it, then you can make the change. And take two snapshots. 1993, when President Clinton tried to open service to gays and lesbians serving openly in the military. They were already there in the military, but they had to be closeted. The civilian population wasn't ready for it, and Congress wasn't ready for it. They pushed back, and they prevented President Clinton from doing that. But a couple decades later, President Obama did the same thing. No pushback from Congress or from civilian society. Civilian society had changed. And so whatever the issue is, I think this is the kind of dynamic that plays out with the U.S. military. What the U.S. military asks is, if we are obeying the civilian leaders, that's what we're supposed to do. When the civilian leaders change and the policy changes, don't blame us for having obeyed the civilian leaders in the previous administration. This was your point. It was our professional duty to salute and obey the lawful orders of the prior administration. Trust us that we will obey your lawful orders as well. And when that mistrust, when they say, we don't think you can do this, intersects with these highly polarized culture war questions, that's when the friction gets the greatest. And I'll stop there.
Either one of you two want to address that issue? In the State Department, I mean, that's another one of the departments that's pushed forward on some of these social issues.
Yeah, I think the Department of State has actually been, if not behind the curve, at least not well ahead of the curve. It has kind of a well-deserved reputation for being pale male Yale. And
Pale male Yale. Yeah.
And, well into the 70s, if you were one of the few women in the Foreign Service who married, you had to resign from the Foreign Service. Well into the 70s, officers were, their performance evaluations included comments on how their wives interacted during social occasions and that sort of thing. So we certainly have not been at the forefront of social change. I think there's reasons for that. You're serving overseas in countries that, well, for one thing, you're overseas. You're not part of the U.S. culture, and so it's not necessarily surprising that you're a bit behind social changes that may be occurring in the U.S. You're also often serving in cultures that are considerably more culturally conservative than the U.S. But as an institution, we have certainly not been at the forefront of social change.
Okay, so I take that back. I was wrong. Mark, do you have something to add?
I don't think I have nothing to add on culture wars. I think
Smart.
I do want to raise a related question, though,
Okay,
which
go ahead.
is I don't want to change
use your
the topic,
microphone. Mark,
but-
use your microphone.
but having. Thank you. The question I would like to raise is the balance of civil-military relations is. We're so used to it because we're in a democracy, a stable society, and we've been functioning. I recall, however, the first time soon after I was started teaching, I was in Britain, and this is in the early 70s, and I heard among politicians a discussion that maybe the fracturing of British society was so intense with the unions, and that maybe the only solution was to have an increased role of the military in the governance of Great Britain. I thought that was extraordinary. And then, having served as a reserve naval attaché in Chile, and I served there at the time of what we call the democratic transition. Pinochet was still running the show. The military had been in power for 17 years, and U.S. foreign policy was how to transition from a military government to a civilian authority. And I guess my question for Professor Feaver is if you were giving a talk to some uh, dictatorial regimes in from developing countries where the military was the dominant power, what do you, as a scholar and a student of civil military, what kind of advice would you give to try to nurture civilian authority that was appreciative of the restoration of a more limited military authority? And I would tell you that was a central concern. I had a part in having actually Colin Powell went to Chile to give a lecture, and my recommendation was that the civilian leaders in the military should gather together in a big auditorium and have somebody like Bud McFarlane or Brent Scowcroft or Colin Powell, somebody who had broached that subject, to give a talk. The military at the time was in control, and the talk was given by Colin Powell to some 400 senior military leaders. And I saw the video. I wasn't there when it happened. But Colin Powell, he was then soon after the Gulf War, and he comes out in his green uniform, and there's simply a single microphone, and of course everybody is got their earphones up for simultaneous translation. And he says, "My name is Colin Powell. I am chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Long silence. "My boss is Richard Cheney, the Secretary of Defense. He serves at the pleasure of the elected president." Long silence.
Mm.
And it later on I discovered that it was a seminal event in getting the military. It was just an aid. It was,
Right.
but U.S. government was trying to get the military to go back to the barracks.
Yep.
And so I guess my question for Professor Heber, you're giving a talk to dictators who are used to dictatorial power. There's no democracy, doesn't work. What can you say from your scholarship and knowledge
Hmm.
about how to encourage the military to go back to the barracks and the civilians to rise? Is there anything that you could add to that?
So, well, this reminds me that when I would talk about challenges in American civil military relations, one of my friends who's from another country said, "Well, in my country, we aspire to reach the depths to which you say you have sunk in the United States." That so, as bad as things might get in the United States, they have been much, much worse in other countries. And you already identified one of the ways that the United States can be a force for good in the world is to show that you can be an exceptionally capable military and still be subordinate to civilian control. And Colin Powell was a master at doing that. Obviously, an extraordinarily capable military officer, and we had just demonstrated in Desert Storm just how good the U.S. military was. We were fighting against a dictator who was so worried about his control over his military that he imposed deleterious methods of control that undermined the effectiveness of the Iraqi military. So it was large, well armed, but not all that capable. Only certain units were capable of fighting at the level that all of the U.S. units were capable of doing it. But U.S. could do that because of the level of trust and professionalism in the commitment to be subordinate to civilian control. So I do think that the U.S. as an example. And that's why bringing foreign militaries to the United States for training and education is a good thing, and I support it. But there's two other aspects, and that is we have an exceptionally well-educated military officer corps. They are not merely trained in tactics, but also in strategy, Paul Mill, and all other sorts of topics as well. And so the capacity of the U.S. military officer to invest in their professional development and their growth, as a friend of mine who was a special forces officer said, well, for the early part of my career, I was hired for what I could do from the neck down, but from here on in, what matters is what I can do from the neck up. It's his brain is what makes a capable 06, 07, 08 officer. And investing in that is something that foreign militaries are reluctant to do for fear of creating capable rivals. And the last thing I would say that we do well is better in the United States than most other countries is investing in civilian military expertise. So you can be a civilian who knows an awful lot about the military and is very capable and have never served with the military. And I have many colleagues of mine who meet that test. They really know the military. They never spent a day in uniform. Hard to do that in other countries where the silos are much more strictly enforced. And so when I'm talking to my colleagues in other countries, I say, make sure you create a capable civilian expertise in military affairs.
Let's go to audience questions. Nathan, we need a microphone. Hannah is serving us today.
Hey, thank you for your talk. My question was mainly about adding another sort of dimension to this question of like civil military corporate relationships, and I wanted to get your thoughts on where you think the sort of the Department of War and the military will go in terms of like adoption of AI systems. Recently there's been the controversy with Anthropic and declaring it a supply chain risk potentially. And then just like other broader questions of artificial intelligence in the military, whether that's like internal rogue takeover or gradual disempowerment of the military institution. So I don't know, just like from your experience as a scholar and sort of in the White House, what are your sort of intuitions about where that will go in the next coming years?
So there are two dibs that we need to worry about. The one is the defense intellectual base. That's the one I've been talking about up till now. The other is the defense industrial base. And that's one where this administration has been really forward-leaning. The last administration was worried about it and accelerated things. And this administration has taken it to 11. There you go. There's your other.
Taking it to 11.
Yes, precisely. And they have said we got to go even faster. We are behind the Chinese in the defense industrial base. We have hollowed out U.S. military industrial capacity. So the arsenal of democracy, which my hometown was a key component, Bethlehem Steel, we won World War II, in case you were wondering. It was won in Bethlehem with Bethlehem Steel. We have hollowed out that capacity. We can't build ships and planes at the rate that we will need to if we ever found ourselves, God forbid, in a high-intensity conflict with a country, a peer rival, near-peer rival like China. And so this administration has taken that very clearly, taken that very seriously. This Secretary Hegseth, has leaned into accelerating innovation, and he's pushing on an open door. All of the services are keen to accelerate that. And there's an appetite for bringing in some of the insights and rapid scaling that might come from Silicon Valley, and the leveraging that might come from deploying AI systems. And so I think this administration can be applauded for all of that they are doing. I would say every single thing that they're doing, but for their general impetus for accelerating and moving fast. And in so doing, they're accepting some risk. And we see that even now with the pushback from Anthropic. that they're accepting some risk. But when you go fast, you may have to incur some risk. And this administration said we're going to do that because we cannot fall behind. We cannot allow the Chinese to gain the advantage on the race. They don't talk about it the same way that the Biden administration talked about it, and neither administration would admit to this, but there's actually a lot more continuity on those issues across those things, those domains. And that's a sign that there's probably a real problem. When very different presidents are doing the very same thing, that's a sign that this is what the country probably needs.
Sam.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no.
Wait for the mic. We want to make sure you're on the recording.
All right. Recently, there was in China, as there was a purge of the military. President Xi, Chairman Xi, whatever you want to call him, he he acted in a way that y'all would urge against. He effectively told the generals that you're no longer useful, or you're incompetent, corrupt, or traitors, or whatever. And he said you're fired, or prison, or worse. So should we really worry about falling behind China, considering that their military structure is doing exactly what you guys have urged against?
Well, I'm not privy to the information that Xi Jinping is privy to, so I don't know whether every one of those generals he's purged deserved to be purged. I find it plausible that a lot of them were involved in corrupt activities. Indeed, this has been a problem that China has had for quite a long time, that they underfunded their military and then said, go make the money building hotels, engaged in tourism, stuff like that. And that is, of course, an invitation to corruption. And so I'm not surprised that he found corruption. I'm surprised that 13 years after he has been in his position, he still feels he has to fire people, including some of the ones closest to him, some of his oldest friends. Now we're starting to look like this is a insecure leader rather than a good governance, time to clean house kind of leader. That's where he might have presented in 2012, 2013. We're past that now. And I think in doing so, I think he has undermined the military effectiveness of his government, of his military. However, that is not entirely reassuring. It doesn't mean that I can sleep a little better at night, because if the Chinese military is less capable, but Xi Jinping has a higher appetite for risk, then he could stumble into military conflicts with the United States where there's not good military leaders warning him about those. And maybe here's the part I most worry about, no good military leaders on the Chinese side with good relations with the military leaders on the American side who can talk each other down from crisis miscommunications. And so I think it probably has set back the Chinese military a little bit, but it may not have reduced the risk of U.S.-Chinese military conflict as much as you might think.
If I can just add one thing to that, it's that there is, however, a significant mismatch between the defense industrial base that the Chinese have put together and our own.
Yes.
When you look just at shipbuilding and their ability to build, 400 ships a year now,
Yes.
compared to ours to build 3 or 4. Those sorts of things matter.
Yes.
But Alexander Stubb has come to our rescue. Because you remember, Trump and Stubb made that agreement about icebreakers. And I think over half of them are going to be made in the United States with Finnish technology. So we're building up our new capacity at shipbuilding once again. So,
And we're engaging our allies in that. The Australians and the Japanese and the Koreans are also we're working on interoperability, and we're working on using their shipyards and their defense industries as well in a way that we haven't in the past. We've always wanted to be self-sufficient.
Yeah. And now we're dependent. Yeah. Is that Daniel? Is that your arm? Yeah. Great.
You
Please
use
stand
the
up so we can see you. Yeah. There you go.
you use the term culture war a lot in your talk. I'm under the impression that when one goes to war, one has a clear objective in mind. What would you say the objective of the culture war for each party is, other than just making the other party suffer? And why is the military a good tool for accomplishing that objective?
So I don't attribute malign motives to in the culture war. You don't have to have a malign motive. Let's take the one a couple years ago. Senator Tuberville put a hold on all general and flag officer promotions, and the issue that he was fighting about concerned access to abortion, and whether U.S. funds, DoD funds, could be used to pay for a servicewoman who wanted to go and get an abortion, or go from one state where they cannot get an abortion to another state where they can. And I would say that Senator Tuberville was probably sincere in opposing abortion and opposing the use of DoD funds for this, as was sincere the Biden administration in saying that the woman's access to abortion care, or to abortion, should be preserved, and that this was a principled defense of her access to health care. And so I think both sides could have been sincere, believing that what they were fighting for was something deeply central to the American human right privilege. Why were they fighting over the military? Because the military is a prominent target. By putting a hold on the general and flag officer promotions, Senator Tuberville had the DoD in the grip, had them by the neck,
Throat, yes.
by the throat, and knew that this was imposing real hardship on the department, and that was going to create pressure on, or so he hoped, so he claimed, the pressure on the Biden administration to relent. So far, I've attributed benign intent, but in that episode, something else happened. It was working politically for Senator Tuberville. It was hurting the Department of Defense, but it was working politically. He fundraised off that. He became more prominent. It was also working for the Biden White House, who, while they did not like what was being done to the military, they liked having the argument be about abortion, where polling was backing them and not Senator Tuberville. So you had a political dispute that was working for both of the political combatants and not working for the military that was stuck in the middle. And so that's sort of a good illustration of what I'm talking about. You don't have to have malign intent. You can be sincere in believing that whatever policy you're fighting for is the right one for the country. But I'm asking, don't target the military as you fight for that. And so if I had had 5 minutes with Senator Tuberville, I would have pointed out that what he needs to do is pass legislation that forbids the Department of Defense from spending money this way. Guess what? That would prevent the Defense Department from spending money that way. And he didn't do that because he didn't have the votes. So instead of conceding that in a democracy he didn't have the votes and so he didn't get to win the policy, he found another way to get it done at the expense of the military.
Let me ask a question and pick up on this partisanship or use of the military in partisan combat and debates. A couple of examples that I'm just thinking off the top of my head. one that really struck me, and I think this was in Trump 1 during the second presidential campaign, when I think it was July 4th, it could have been something different, but he had a rally on the White House lawn, and he had a lot of soldiers who were whooping and hollering in a rather partisan way. And I can remember commentary in the papers after that being, this was inappropriate use of government property. Has never been done before. But obviously, there was no reprimand whatsoever on that. Hold that in your head. And then the other, the other one was from the other side, which is I think it was 6 Democrats, including Senator Kelly, who said to the military, you can't obey an unlawful order. And now Pete Hegseth has tried to punish Kelly and the others in deep ways. Do you see those as just not inconsequential little trivial battles in the culture war, or does this really matter to the military being used in these ways?
Well, these are exactly the kinds of things that in my nerd community we just go, we explode over. I would describe it this way. So I'm not sure what from the first term you're referring to, but there is a perfect illustration just from the second term.
Okay.
In June, President Trump went to Fort Bragg to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Army, the founding of the Army, and that turned into a pretty partisan speech and had the feel of a rally, and there was a lot of whooping and hollering from the troops that were on in the wallpaper behind him, and they were cheering not just the stuff that's okay to cheer. I'm raising your pay, hooray! The Army is the best army in the world, hooray! President Biden was the worst president we've ever had. At that moment, what professional military ethics requires is the military goes stone silent. That's a partisan statement. And even if they agreed with that, and I know that a number of those folks did agree, they thought Biden was not a good commander-in-chief. How do I know this? Because they cheered loudly when they heard that, and they expressed their view, their partisan view. But that was a violation of military ethics. And I can explain in gruesome detail why it went sideways like that. The important point is President Trump returned to Fort Bragg last week or 2 weeks ago, gave a very similar speech. You didn't see that. What happened in the interim was the senior military officers had a little bit of education for the troops and said, look, when the president says he's paying us and sending us building a bigger military, we can cheer that. When he says that the Army should have beat Navy in football, we can cheer that. It's been a while since they did that. As a Navy officer, former, we can recognize excellence when we see it on the football field. So there are things that it's okay to cheer, and there are things that it's not okay to cheer. And you saw this perfectly modeled in the Quantico speech when President Trump and Secretary Hegseth spoke and had assembled 800 of the general and flag officers from that has never been done before. Talk about unprecedented. And when they gave partisan comments, which civilian political leaders are allowed to do, they are partisan animals. They can say partisan things. The military responded quietly and respectfully. That's how it's supposed to go. And so I do think you can ask the military to behave themselves even if the civilian leaders are behaving in partisan ways. Now you asked about the videos. What was said on those videos, the content of those videos, is basic civil military relations 101. It's literally what is taught to military officers and enlisted and has been drilled into them ever since the My Lai massacre, that you, if given an unlawful order, you have a professional duty not to carry it out. That is the content of those videos. The context of that video was something very different. The context was, don't you think you've been receiving unlawful orders? Wink, wink, nod, nod. If so, we expect you not to carry those out. And so President Trump and Secretary Hegseth reacted to the context rather than the content. And my plea to those members of Congress is, if you think that the president has been giving unlawful orders, read your Constitution, particularly Article 1, which describes what you, members of Congress, can do about this. Hold the hearings, ask the questions. If you think there's been unlawful orders, you are the politically empowered actor to make a difference. And don't expect the military to save you from your dereliction of duty. Now, that's a little unfair. I wouldn't say dereliction of duty, and let's delete that from the tape if we can. But I do think that they were exhibiting a long-standing pattern in American history where when we think something is too difficult for us as civilians to handle, we ask the military to do that. And I think that was what was off-putting about those videos. It was asking the military to do something that Congress was empowered to do.
Okay, well, we only have enough time for 30-second wrap-up, so anybody want to give us a 30-second pull together here? Anybody?
No, but I
Larry,
would like to
no.
revise and extend my earlier comment,
Okay.
which is simply to say that, well, the State Department is culturally quite conservative. I think it is fair to say that the department, members of the department do tend to lean more politically liberal than conservative, and I think that's a fair observation.
Okay, and that has certainly been my experience in the several embassies I've been to over the years. Mark, last word, 30 seconds.
I can't add to the wisdom that's been shared.
Okay.
And then let me just say this. If you're in an undergrad at Furman, consider national service. Please consider national service. You can do so in uniform. That would be great. The U.S. military needs you. So please join the military if that is something that you can do. But if that's not your way of serving, find another way to serve. Join the State Department. Teach inner city math to high school and middle school students. Talk about a service that this country needs. There are so many ways that you can serve our country, and I hope you will be inspired by the example that the military has shown of one way to do national service, but there's many, many other ways. And when you do that, I will say to you, thanks for your service.
Can I just add to an amen to that? Because I have to say that if you want to be a part of a participant of our community, the United States of America, it's not enough just to be passive. You have to be active. And I think what Professor Feaver has just said is truly remarkable. In my experience in observing people who have found freedom in service, there's something really wonderful that happens when you give time to a cause other than your own self-interest. So my challenge to Furman students is don't just pursue your narrow short-term interest. Develop your gifts and then give them away to a cause that's greater than your own interest. And you'll sleep soundly and you'll find great gratitude throughout life if you do that.
Amen.
A great way to end. Before we are dismissed, let me encourage you to attend next month's events scheduled for March 17 and 18. The topic will be America and the Global Economy, and there will be fireworks. Now let's show our appreciation to our speakers, and you are dismissed.